Do I age myself embarrassingly if I ask who remembers the animated movie Charlotte's Web and how Charlotte teaches Wilbur to say salutations? Wilbur is a pig. Uh, you know what? I don't care if that story ages me. It's a good one and it's a good movie. They don't make movies like that anymore. I am Eve Sturgis. I'm the very old host of Everything's Relative, this podcast where we talk about DNA discoveries fucking up people's lives. Totally changing identities, turns families upside down, and I think ultimately changes the way that we understand people, understand ourselves, and understand the people around us. When I describe it that way, that sounds like a very big undertaking. And I just think of myself as just here to collect stories. I want people to share truths so that no one feels alone in their journey. So that's me. That's this. Welcome. So today's a really important episode. It's possibly the most important episode of my very short podcasting career. And that's because I talk with my guest Laura about some huge important things, and we go places that we haven't gone before. I've hinted at it, I've skirted around it, and acknowledged it a little bit, but we're really going to talk about it out loud and get real about the subtext of so many NPE stories. Before we do that, I want to tell you how this all came together. So this is a new kind of crossover episode that Lily Wood of the podcast NPE Stories and I are trying out. So a few months ago, Lily contacted me and said, I just talked with this guest, Laura. Her story is extremely intense, and we ran out of time before we could really process a lot about what she talked about. So, Eve, I need you to host the second half of the story. So right now, if you have not heard that story, stop this podcast. Go listen, go find the podcast called NPE Stories and listen to Laura's story. It aired in March. After listening to her story, come on over here back to Everything's Relative with Eve Sturgis. And Laura and I are going to talk about her story in a different way and not so much the detailed content of what happened, but we're going to explore more about what it all means for Laura moving forward. We talk about what role shame plays in her family narrative. And we want to talk about whether the DNA discoveries often reveal these really dark truths or hard truths that people do not want to know about or look at about their families or about people they love. So I'm also going to tell my listeners that this episode comes with a very big trigger warning. This episode may not want to be one that you listen to if words and concepts used around trauma and rape are upsetting to you. If Lily's episode upsets you, don't listen to this episode. If what I just said upsets you, don't go to Laura's episode at NPE Stories. Just take a week off. There's a lot of other things you can do with your time right now. And I guess I want to clarify what I mean by upset, because rape and trauma should upset you. But if it's too hard for you, if you're upset, crosses the line into the land of triggered, please take the time off. You're not obligated to listen to this. No one is obligated ever to listen, but take care of yourself more than anything. All right. Thanks so much. Oh, I'm so glad we finally got to connect and that you're on video because, yeah, it's good. It's good. And so what I want to do, and you tell me, and we can do this together. We can do this together. Like I am open and flexible, whatever you want. But because you gave your story on NPE Stories with Lily Wood, we're not going to go over your whole story again. Yeah, did it. Give yourself a break.
I listened to that and I think it was so necessary. And I just struggle with I don't know, right? It's this fucked upness of oh my gosh, I took up way too much time and way too much space. And it's it's not like any of it wasn't real. I just really struggle. I always have with this distorted thinking of too much space, too much time. And even when I talk to my friends or close people about this, I'm I literally try to explain it in 30 seconds because for my whole life, everything has been something that takes up giant space. The experience that I'm having is not small potatoes. And I feel this need to make it I don't know. Anyways, so thank you for that permission. And I don't know. Yeah, I don't want to talk about that anymore.
Yeah. So, yeah. And it I sometimes, I'll do that where I'll feel totally comfortable when I'm telling the story, and then afterwards I spin for hours in this like vulnerability place of like, oh my God, I might as well just peel a layer of skin off. Like,
yeah, like did I just
everybody
take
knows.
a lap naked? Like what happened? And that's how I felt afterwards for like days. And I did one with
Jody
Did you on
Jody?
Wednesday. And it's like this, I had to have someone remind me like, hey, you remember you did that thing? And I'm like, oh yes, right. That thing where it's like, I said it and I wanted to say it and I needed to say it and it was important. But then there's also like an after effect of that.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I also like, I'm really like freshly aware too of how hard, like for me, I don't know if I express enough. I mean, I always say thank you to my guests, but I don't know if I acknowledge enough to people how much I know this is like, like really hard stuff. Like it's like like, hey, come on, like show me your soul. And or let's talk about this really like deep stuff or dark stuff or both. And I just talked to somebody last couple weeks ago, and he couldn't get through the story, and he felt really embarrassed about it, and I felt like it was such a it was such a I don't want anyone to feel too upset, but like it was such a great reminder of like how intense this stuff is. Like, oh yeah, this is really like I get to sit here and listen to a lot of it and relate to a lot of it and be interested, but people are like hurting and healing, and
yeah,
it's no joke.
Yeah. And I think for me, where I struggle with it, like with my brain, also like as a therapist and thinking, is this space of like, yes, I know that trauma is not like the healing is not an arrival. And I get that. But right now, mine is so active and ongoing, and I forget that it is like still actively happening and currently happening, that I can get so mixed up and frustrated with myself for like, why am I still in this place? Why today am I feeling this way? And I have to remember, like, this shit's still happening. Like, it is still being perpetrated.
It's
big.
It's not over.
And just that.
Yeah, for most people, I think for most people or many people, it's not over. And so many, like, people even say, I have that experience too, where people say to me like, well, what happened? And I'm like, it's not a happened. It is happening. Like it is, we are in it. So, okay. So all of that to say, we're not going to go from beginning to end of your story. We're going to tell everybody instead, please go to Lily Wood's podcast called NPE Stories. And or you can go over to Jody Kligman's podcast called Sex, Lies, and the Truth. And both of those podcasts are great. I'm friends with both of those women. We all have the same goals, which is to share these stories, spread the word, inform and educate people. So go listen to those podcasts so you can hear the story. And then where you're going to pick up with me, with Laura and I, is that we're just going to talk about sort of what I want to talk about is from a therapist perspective. I'm wondering if you can just give everyone a like a simple, not as simple as I would do it, but like a simplified version of talking about neurodevelopment in teenagers. Talk about where people are at as adolescents versus adults. Talk about how addiction affects that. Talk about how trauma affects that. And then, no problem. No big deal.
These are just these. I have to be reminded of all these intersections of these things, and like it could be just. There's so many layers, and we all have them. But when I look at this particular thing, I'm like, there are so many layers that we could pull back and explore, and each has its own like field of study. And like someone has spent their entire life studying all of these things, and they're all happening in one space.
All happening in one space. We'll throw in some epigenetics while we're there. And then we'll talk about how it relates. So we'll talk about that information in a broad sense. And then what I want to do is talk about how it applies to you and the NPE story, and then and then obviously like I want to talk about how we can go through like my catalog of interviews, and this is such a common theme. But people don't quite know the words to put it. And it's like, it enters this very uncomfortable area for people when it comes to teens. And So that's what I want to talk about today.
Yeah.
That's okay. And shame, like all of this under the umbrella of shame.
Any, do you have any other people who were like parents were teenagers that you've talked to? Okay.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And in fact, I have another one this season, and her mother was 15 and doesn't even remember.
Okay.
And was at a party, and we don't, and it's uncomfortable for everybody for lots of reasons, but one word that no one will say is rape.
Yeah. That word, when I say it and when I've interacted with my family, when everyone was talking to me and speaking of this at all, and I would say rape, they were like, ugh. Like, why would you say
it's
so offensive to say that word? And it's like, yeah, but that thing happened. Like, that word that no one will say is so real. And you just need to bring that. You need to reckon with that and accept it. So, yeah.
Yeah. And it's complex and it's not black or white. And yeah, rape is one word for a lot of things. But let's start talking about. So I have to take a breath. I can get so heated about this. All right. So let's talk about brain development. Do you want, and you tell me about what's going on in a young person's mind, basically. From as it applies to your story within context. But
so I guess I should say I am a therapist and I work with kids and I have that understanding. And I think one of the things that the space that exists, that when painful things happen or scary things that elicit fear in our brain happen, like I think of it as almost like this roadblock happened, or like not even a roadblock, but like there was a hole in the road at that point. And like, you can still go over the hole, but you might get stuck in the hole. It created a change, and that change is always going to exist unless it is acknowledged and healed, or given the space to heal. So maybe it wasn't acknowledged, but other resiliency things were happening around it. So there was space for healing. But otherwise, you can get stuck in that space. And maybe you're not stuck in that space every minute of every day. But when scary or fearful things happen, you go back and you're stuck at that age where that occurred. I'm certainly not an expert in this, but it is an area of study that I find really interesting, and I definitely geek out on. And so when I learned,
and it's new. Yeah. It's kind of new. I think we should say that for listeners, that this is new developments in development, new scientific understanding in brain development and child development and trauma. And so if people have not heard of it, that's okay. And also it's people that are older may struggle with these concepts because it's just was not in even the therapeutic space.
Yes,
until
and even
recently.
In the therapeutic space, I am still often met with, because I work in the world of foster care, both personally and professionally. And when I bring up these topics, I'm met with, by peers, I'm met with such like resistance and yes, but they're just bad. And I'm like, well, no, like these things happened. And so if we can understand why they're behaving the way they're behaving, then we can help them. And so even in the professional realm, at least my experiences is there's still some pushback or just lack of knowing that leads to pushback. But when I think about it in the context of my mom and knowing my family, and so my mom had, as far as I understood it until this knowledge, a really stable, loving, supporting environment. So, her parents, my grandfather's professional, he owns a business, he's a doctor. My grandmother stayed home, and my grandmother isn't like, she's nurturing and loving, but like I always recognized there was a lot of shame in that space, but for the most part, it was like, it appeared, and I thought it was a safe, supportive environment, and she always had all her needs met. And so her struggle with addiction and like how hard it was for her to like have moments of sobriety or stay sober despite all the resources she had was really mind-boggling to me. I always wondered, and once I got to a certain point in my like education in my career, I realized maybe something happened. was the first way it came into my brain, was there must have been something that occurred in her life that is so painful that she carries around, that she can't get through this without alcohol. She can't manage it without this. Yes. But I say that all that, and I brought that up to say, I always, not always, it's for a long time, I've had this belief something painful had to happen to her. I just don't know what it is. And so when she disclosed this information in December 2019, while it was so devastating and like life altering, I also had such relief. I had this understanding. I now understood what the piece of the puzzle was that kept her from being able to be healthy and sober despite resources, and that prevented her from being loving and nurturing and kind the way I needed her to be. I had an understanding of that now. And I've always been a person that's like seeking meaning and trying to have meaning and understand things. So for me, it was a relief or a gift. I'm not sure the right word, but I was grateful to have that understanding and to have that knowledge. I think I was the only one that was happy that that information came out.
Yeah, I mean, I relate to that, wholly relate to that. I have a very different story, but that the way that, and I think a lot of people relate to the feeling of like, of the final piece falling into place, of like, oh,
yeah,
that's what's been going on for my whole life.
Yeah.
This is this missing, this huge, in what, you know, the invisible elephant, whatever. It's just like, so yours has the added layer of trauma, but I really relate to that feeling of relief.
Yes. And I still think it. And I still am glad that she had the courage or the space. I still haven't been able to really get out of her what it is that like she felt being able to say it, because, you know, I talked about at the beginning, like this is an ongoing trauma for me, but it is certainly an ongoing trauma for her, because she carried this for my family in secret for over 31 years, 32 years. And now she says it and no one believes her and they deny her experience completely. And that is an active, ongoing thing, as you know, the perpetrator is still an accepted and fine member of our family and of the community. And she is still on the outside, and just how painful that knowing is for her, and just how my family cannot understand that concept, no matter how it's been presented to them. And I think that definitely makes this situation, that's one of the hardest pieces for me. Like, yes, I feel the ongoing trauma of being denied, but I'm so connected with my mom in this and have such empathy for her in this space that that is just one of the most painful pieces, that she's still denied.
So confusing. It must be so confusing and heartbreaking and infuriating. I just can't even. Yeah, I almost want you to repeat it, that she carried this for 34 years, a secret, this deep secret, deep and dark
secret. She carried it, and it allowed him, right? Her holding that secret allowed him like space and whatever level of freedom he had. I'm sure there wasn't, I don't know. I can't imagine what it's like in his brain, but a level like my aunt, her sister, you know, she held that for her too, because she got to have her life as the world saw it. And so did her husband, and their success in business and their success in their prospective fields and in our community there, and just all of that. And my grandparents and their space in that community. My mom did not, she held all of that heavy, dirty stuff for everyone. And then when she finally had a space for whatever reason to say it, they said, no, thank you. Please keep holding that. Please shut up. And you have to keep holding that. Like, we're not going to acknowledge it. And I don't believe they see it that way, because I think in order to believe a lie like this or sit in the space that they sit in, you convince yourself of what you want to believe because there's no other way to get through the day.
100%. 100%. I think lots of people in the NPE space, our community, have a new understanding of denial through this experience about what the power of what our minds will do.
Yeah, and I've spoke with my mom about that. There's been a couple of times where she agreed that I could ask her some more questions and just try to understand and get a better understanding. And one of the things that she says like repeatedly, no matter how many times I tell her I believe her, is I really didn't know. I really didn't know that he was your dad or could have. And I have said to her so many times, of course you didn't. I believe you. And I get that. Like you had to believe this truth to survive. You had to believe it to survive then. And you had to believe it to survive all these years. So of course you believe it. And I don't hold that against you because that is how your brain and your body kept you safe. That could not be true. So it just wasn't. And that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And she just says it repeatedly. And I feel so bad for her that she carries that responsibility that she was supposed to have this understanding at that age, at 16, making these critical and hard decisions. And it was made even more complex. And this is slightly off topic, but I was working in my professional work with a young mom who secretly, she was pregnant and she created an adoption plan and followed through with an open adoption at 15 on her own completely, and trying to help her make sense of those things. And it was just this reminder that this is such an adult thing. These are such adult concepts that a 15-year-old brain can't make those choices. A 16-year-old brain can't make those choices. And I was born to my mom when she was 16, 17, but her abuse started 2 years before that. So her stunt was at 14 at a minimum.
14. I want to just emphasize.
And
14.
that's what I've tried to explain to my family is maybe it makes sense and it's easier for you to make sense of, she was 16, she was 17 when this happened. She liked this, she wanted this, but trying to help them understand the concept that the abuse, this relationship, whatever you want to call it, these interactions started at 14. And so her development, her ability to think and rationalize is stuck at 14. And so we have to, and unless you acknowledge that, then you just see her as a promiscuous 16 or 17-year-old, as my grandmother refers to her, who enjoyed sleeping with her sister's boyfriend and not recognizing all of the grooming, all of the mental manipulation, all those things that happened from 14 on, and that physically changed her brain at that point. And she didn't have an opportunity for those spaces to be healed.
The vulnerability of a 14-year-old, it feels. I have a daughter. She's 17, and to I think I don't know. I'm speechless. I have no words when I think about 14-year-old girls and the vulnerability they're in. And when I think about myself at 14 and the things that I did as a teenager and what I thought I knew what I was doing and now understanding about brains and so this is really uncomfortable. And I feel like that, even that word I've said so many times, it's starting to sound cheaper than
uncomfortable.
Yeah. It's uncomfortable. But what I mean is that there's this, your family has come so far as to acknowledge, okay, this guy might be the dad or is the dad. He's your bio dad is the dad, but it's not his fault. And it wasn't rape. And she wanted it and it was consensual. And what's in the past is in the past. And it just gets murky and gross. I feel gross. I don't know if you can see me sinking in my chair, but
and I would just like to say that the depth that you gave this situation in that 7 seconds is more depth than my family has been able to give and acknowledge in this situation. And And I want to sit here and say, if my reaction was different and I was less angry 2 years ago, then maybe they would have had more space to have understanding. And like my big giant anger reaction as a feminist and as a person that advocates for justice day to day, with like my reaction was huge. And so I've told myself, maybe you didn't give them the space to arrive at this. And like that in itself is fucked up, that I've sat here and said like my reaction was too big for them to have a healthy reaction. No, like I'm allowed to be really
right.
mad
That was
about
your
this. And
right. That's your responsibility.
yes.
Right. Your response. Yeah. Oh,
But it's so important to say, like, even they don't even have a word to say this is uncomfortable. The blame is all on my mom. And it's easy to blame her. And I talked about this recently, like she is a really easy person to blame in this situation and just put it all on her and now on me, right? Because it's my fault that our family is torn apart, because I want to talk about this and I want this to be acknowledged. Not that it's his fault. So I believe I touched on it in the previous podcast, but I was told that it was going to be my fault that he killed himself because I am pursuing the knowing of this and I want more information and I want accountability. And so is there going to be my fault if he ever completes suicide? Not acknowledging like all of these really terrible things that he's done, that, these were his choices, his behaviors. And, now my mom lives this life that is uncomfortable and not pretty on the outside because she has so much pain on the inside. But that makes her the really easy target to blame this entire situation on. And just let her keep self-destructing and carrying all that weight. Like, let's keep him untouched because it allows the rest of the family unit and image to just stay okay. And that's easier.
Yeah, don't disrupt the system.
No.
They can't. So do you have in your mind an idea of what would be some examples of taking responsibility for a family in this position? Like what that would look like? Different ideas. It doesn't have to be like exactly what you think he should do, but
well, I think the first thing is acknowledgement and a sense of acknowledgement and ownership. So, but when I think about accountability, it's just recognizing and acknowledging the pain you caused, right? So not just saying, okay, yeah, I'm sorry, I never knew I was your dad. Okay. But now acknowledging what is your responsibility in that as the adult in the situation, as the parent in the situation. Just acknowledging the pain is so important, and the experience, and saying, yes, that happened. Yes, I did this. For me, the biggest thing has been in this particular situation, like in my situation, is establishing paternity, and not just on like ancestry DNA, but actually establishing paternity, because at a minimum, that gives my mom a sliver of justice. Because if you just compare their ages, no matter what your perception or whatever you think is reasonable as an individual, you can still see the ages, and the ages matter. And so that's a recognition of this was at a minimum a statutory rape situation. And getting that on paper gives me a sense that she would get some justice, and it would just be acknowledgement of my experience as I'm continue to experience this situation today. I'm not sure if that is clear. But in summary, I think having to acknowledge the pain caused is important, and acknowledge the pain caused to my mom all these years, right? Not to say that my mom isn't responsible for her choices and behaviors, but acknowledging the situation and her lived experience that led to the person she is today. The corrosiveness of the painful, terrible, violent thing that happened, the rape, the assault, all those things that happened for years. So maybe it stopped, but then she still carried that, and just how corrosive that is, and how there's really no way for her to make sense of that on her own. So of course she self-medicated. Of course she self-destructed, all those things. And he doesn't have to take any ownership of that right now. And that's really hard for me.
Yeah. None of this happened in a vacuum.
And then
Right.
The other piece, and not that, I mean, I have my own really painful experience and relationship with my birth certificate dad, but acknowledging that he was willing and stepped in to be my dad when he was also 16 because he thought he was my dad. But so he was also a victim in this. He became a dad as a teenager himself. And while, yes, sure, he can say like, he'll always be my dad and what a gift I was and all these things. That's his inability to recognize that he was also a victim at 16 by being told he was a dad of a kid that he wasn't. And no recognition or accountability for that. Like 2 kids' lives were blown up. I don't know.
Yeah. I was just thinking until I had asked you that question of like, what does it look like to acknowledge this? I hadn't really thought of it. I hadn't thought about it in detail. And it's like, and I was just thinking about, and like it's, I have my own stuff going on in my family and so I just, I was thinking if someone is listening and they don't know what to do, like what does saying I'm sorry look like? Or what does working this out look like? Or what does acknowledging the daughter I didn't know was my daughter, this whole thing,
being
like
willing
I'm wondering
in his situation to accept the losses that could come with being honest, right? Which he's not willing to do. Like he won't speak to me.
Right.
And neither, and just to put this into perspective, and neither will my aunt, who is my mom's sister.
Right.
And just
who was betrayed.
Yeah.
Is, all goes into the pile of betrayed, the pile of betrayed hearts in this scenario.
And I've thought about it as like, I've like played out scenarios and thought, how cool would it be if we could come together and look at this from a restorative justice lens, and as a family get together and we talk about the pain caused, because everyone has pain in this situation. Everybody is choosing to deny, minimize, not really address their pain, as far as I can tell by their reactions and refusals. But everyone has pain, including my 3/4 siblings, my cousin brothers. They didn't have the best they had stuff with their dad, but it's made worse now. And they don't have, because everyone is in such self-preservation and like the space of denial, no one has any space for healing. And so everyone is going to pass this dirty, dark thing on to the rest of the generations after them. And how painful and vicious and like, I don't know, it's just insidious, right? It's just kind of like, we know that generational trauma is it's so disruptive and it ruins relationships and it ruins lives. And they're all just going to do that. But what if we could all come together and have an actual like reconciliation of this? Like, how cool would that be? How, like, there could actually be beauty from this wreckage and we could stop these things, but no one's choosing to do that. I mean, I'm choosing to do that. My son will not be carrying any of this with him. But by everyone still, spending every holiday and letting him around their kids and, not acknowledging just how dangerous it is. Because if like a person who did what he did doesn't just like stop and not have risk factors about them, right? That takes healing. And unless you heal, you still run the risk. And what we know about people who perpetrate like this, they don't stop unless they heal, or they are like contained in some way. So I fully believe that I probably have more siblings out there, right? Or that I think that is one of his biggest hesitations in being willing to do the DNA with me, is what other secrets and lies will come out. And everyone's just participating in that.
Yeah. It's too much. Like, I think that idea of coming together and talking and working through it and healing this wreckage, I imagine they feel like they would die.
Oh yeah.
I think they would feel like they would die. Like
they've never felt anything hard.
Right.
They've never,
lives are actually on the line.
And I'm not shocked by the response, right? My family has never dealt with hard things well. Even when I was a teenager and I was bringing up my mom's addiction to my grandparents, they wanted it to not be. They wanted to minimize it. They wanted it to not exist, not be, just go away. They had never had the space to understand it. And same with, I believe my aunt, she got pregnant as a teen. I know she did. She was also pregnant as a teenager. And these are not things that were talked about. And these were not things that were talked about in my family. And I wasn't taught any different, right? I just luckily was smart enough and figured out how to not have sex and not get pregnant. But no one taught me that. So that was never going to stop because of anything my family did. I don't know if that makes sense the way I explain that, but just this, never talked about the hard or uncomfortable things, ever, never, ever. And
right. So there's definitely not going to start now.
No.
But if
no, especially not like this is like Olympic level hard stuff. And we're not even our training wheels aren't even off yet down here. And their emotional capacity, agility, whatever word you want to use there. The training wheels are on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm trying to imagine I wonder if we were going to design like a guidebook, not a book, but like a flow chart of ways to take responsibility from the family's position. It's like level 1 would be acknowledgement. Right. And, I don't even know. It's like level 2 is acknowledgement and medical history. Level 3 is, acknowledgement, medical history, and an apology. And what you're talking about is I don't know, level 10. But I also wish, I wish people would be more open to different ways to approach the end goal. So if all of what you just described sounds too hard, maybe there's a therapist out there that could help everybody.
Yeah.
Or, maybe there's you don't have to do this alone. You don't have to do it in a vacuum. It doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Well, and my grandparents, I don't know, when you said that about family and the flow chart, it prompted me the first 3-ish days, my grandparents, they said things to the effect, it was our fault. How could we let him in? How could we let this happen? I can't believe this happened and we didn't know it. And then that just all went away. So
that was too hard. Oh my God.
They couldn't sit there. That meant, right, looking at it from that angle and not just blaming my mom meant, well, that means we have some stuff to deal with here, some big feelings that we need to reckon with. And no thanks. And then this other option comes up well, we can just, say it was her fault. And then we don't have to reckon with all this. And the most counsel that they received, despite me sharing articles, sharing information, this is how you could show up. These are the things you could say to her. Because in the beginning, everyone was recognizing and did come to me with this sense of, how do we handle this? But then they didn't like that. So
you said you had the wrong ideas.
They thought was palatable, right? At all. Any of my suggestions. But
they're like, no, we meant how do we tie this up in about 24 hours?
Yeah. And so, it's been said to me, well, Father so-and-so, because my family is very Catholic and they're very involved in their church. He says at some point we all have to forgive and you're going to have to forgive and move on from this. And I was like, okay. And then when I said to my grandmother, I really feel like we need to get some additional perspectives than just a Catholic priest. And her response, well, what do you mean by that? And well, historically speaking, their approach to sexual assault hasn't been maybe the best. And that was just like,
they don't have a hot record. They do not have a hot record.
Like, I even said that, right? Like, offended that was what I brought that up. Like, how does that even relate to this? Right. And is that even true?
What does that even have to do with Father right. So-and-so? He is a good man.
He says we just have to forgive and move on. And I was like, yeah, it's like been a month. I'm good.
Right.
I'm not really there yet. And isn't there anything in there in that space about like accountability and reconciling, and or does he just get to still be an usher at church? Cool. Okay, thanks. Like, I checked the bulletin recently.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
An usher at church and like involved and engaged. And I was just, I don't know. For me, I don't know why I was shocked by that. I don't. But that's still happening. And that is, this entity is saying, we know this information, no matter how you cut it, right? They know it in some way. But I guess he said like a few Hail Marys and it was cool. And
right. Wow. Yeah. And I guess like anybody, I would want to communicate to anybody experiencing shame, there's 1,000 layers between deep, dark shame and 100% redemption and forgiveness. And it doesn't have to be, and I know I keep coming back to this, it doesn't have to be either or.
No.
You're not asking him to walk through the town with a shame lady behind him while you whip him the whole, you're not asking him to give up everything in his life.
I have to say that I have those thoughts though, when he just refuses to do anything reasonable, right? I have jokingly said, like, I'll put a billboard up that's like, is so-and-so maybe your dad too? like,
oh my God. Yeah, totally.
Like, and this is the toxicity of what this stuff does to us. Right. And that's like, and you're not going to do that, but that is how dark and shameful we can become when we carry this stuff, when we keep it in the dark and don't bring it to the light. Because I'm not that person. That's not who I want to be. I would not be proud of doing that. I would not.
Right.
But I think it. And I'm like, yeah, well, it might be worth the like 10 minutes of terrible feeling he would feel. But the reality is he has to feel terrible every day. There's just, I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The terrible that he's feeling has got to be so painful that he can't do it. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if I even touched on any of the things we said we wanted to touch on. Sorry.
We did.
I feel that the shame I'm so interested in, and part of why I reached out was this, and this is so ongoing, and my experience with it and my response to it is so ongoing. And I know I have a long way to go. So I just want to recognize that. But just trying to find information or anyone else who can understand the feelings of understanding and learning that you were conceived in such a violent and not loving way, right? How do you make sense of that? And how do you make sense of that when you have an understanding of how trauma is passed down from generation to generation and how the in utero experience affects you? And there's just so much there. And also how damaging shame is and how much I don't want it in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. So when we talk about shame, we're also referring to, and in the same way that we're talking about neurodevelopment, there's all these new studies coming out about trauma and shame being passed down generation to generation, not just through experience, not just that a person experiences trauma so they create trauma, although that happens too when we talk about the cycles of violence or cycles of shame or cycles of trauma. That kind of thing happens too, of course. We all know that scenario. But there's new studies showing that people are literally inheriting shame and trauma and the pain of those things in utero, in their bodies, in their cells, inside their blood, like in their blood, in their cells, in their biology. And it's coming out in studies of people, cultures and that have experienced diaspora. And it's coming from all of these women who grow up with really extreme shame experiences and without necessarily an explanation why. And then they find out their mothers had extreme trauma shame.
Have struggled
and it
in
makes
that
everything
space so hard. Like the sense of shame that I have carried from my earliest memories, like 3 years old and through my entire childhood, all of my memories are, I am bad. What I have done something wrong. My thoughts are bad. And that's just grown. And it's like this, I don't know, some invasive species, right? That we don't want to grow in our garden. Like I've had that since 3 years old and I've never understood why. And that's been so hard to, when I look at my life. And that goes to this idea of like how I walk around and how I experience myself in the world versus how I'm seen in the world. It's drastically different. And that's why I go to therapy still. And I acknowledge that. But it's just like, that's a shitty experience and not cool. And we do that to people. But I also have to recognize, like, yes, I have that and I have this pain and I don't want to sound, I don't know. I also recognize both personally and therapeutically the power of resilience and how that is a muscle and it can grow and be exercised. And there's so many outside factors that contribute to that and support that. And there's always hope, like no matter the trauma, no matter the pain, like, yes, we should see it, but that person more than likely also is insanely resilient. And I think my mom is a beautiful example of that. I don't know how she woke up every morning. I would not have, how did she wake up? How did she go to family holidays? How did she sit at the same table as this man? How did she sit at the same table as her sister? It is mind blowing. And that is resilience. And that is her body's way of protecting her. She had something in her that allowed her to survive. And so while everyone looks at her as this like messy failure, whatever words they want to put on her of a person. And I have to acknowledge, like, I saw that too. But now I look at her and I see just insane resilience and power that she did that. And from 16 on, like at 16, she started managing this situation in a way that is just mind blowing. And I wish people could see that in her. I wish I was not the only one who saw that. And not minimizing like the actual real felt pain that I have from my experiences with her and my giant mother wound that I walk around with. But there is a smidge of hope because I look and I'm like, wow, they're a really, really impressive human to have managed that.
Yeah, I don't think the mothers get enough credit. You can have both. You can have shame and resilience.
Yeah.
You can, the effects of this is just broad, far reaching in a tangled way. Thank you for sitting with me this morning and talking about it.
Yeah. Thanks for creating a space to do it. And I don't think I said any names, but can you make sure I didn't?
Yep. Okay. Absolutely. No problem. Yeah, no, we're gonna, I hope that my family, which is above me during this recording time, they just turned on the water. I don't know if people can hear that. I hope they
sounds like
my daughter also rolled like she just rolled like a shopping cart over me. I hope, and the dog just barked. So hoping we have more editing to do than just names, but I think people are used to this by now. Anyway, yeah, thank you so much for sharing and talking with me about this. It's just, this is really important stuff, and this is the stuff I've been admittedly, like honestly trying to talk about through every episode, through so many episodes. And this is it. Like, I want to get into this nitty gritty deep stuff beyond just the sort of facts of a story. And talk about why this matters, especially for women, why this matters. This is just so much huger.
I hope that the idea of convincing yourself of what you need to believe to survive that trauma response, I hope that resonates with someone. Like, I hope that gives somebody enough space to maybe just see their mom a little bit different. Or I don't know, because that's been the biggest gift for me, is to like be able to see my mom with a little bit more compassion, despite all of the pain and chaos that was created. Because now I know she had to convince herself of those things. It wasn't that she kept this information from me. And honestly, she didn't even say it, right? She just said, hey, I was assaulted and raped by him. We told her that he was our dad, or, according to ancestry.com. And I think that the way that came out was a really big, was fortunate, was a blessing. I don't know how you want to think about it, but that timeline, I think it makes the situation unique, but also it was helpful, because it wasn't that she said it. She was just as shocked.
Yeah. I think that's not uncommon. Yeah. I think this opens a whole world of understanding about denial and what our defense mechanisms will do for us to save us. All right. Thanks for spending some time with me.
I'm gonna go. I don't know. Maybe I should have saved my workout for afterwards. I need to go complete this stress cycle. So maybe I'll go on a little run.
Yeah.
To get all this out.
Go on a run. If you think of anything else, call me. We'll do it again, or we'll talk some more. Yeah. Thank you so much. I really need people to come and want to talk to me about this big stuff. So
I hope, oh my gosh, it is my hope. And that somebody else feels the courage, like, to talk about if they've learned about this being conceived in rape, it's non-consensual way. And I guess I say, like, I'm saying that selfishly, because I'm like, I just want to talk to somebody else who has had this experience.
The phenomenon of DNA discoveries is opening such a Pandora's box of topics that we as a society need to look at and talk about. And a lot of it is extremely uncomfortable and painful. And but the pain and discomfort is why we don't talk about it, or it's why these secrets have been carried on for so long. Lifting shame was such a huge motivation for me in starting this podcast. I wanted people to know they're not alone. And I wanted people in every facet of the DNA discovery to hear that message. And of course, I am primarily focused on the NPE aspect, but I also think about the mothers of these people who make these discoveries. I think about how many mothers made decisions about what to do about unexpected pregnancies when they were younger than their adult children making the discovery now, right? A few weeks ago, you may remember that I talked with Jessica about her mom being 15 years old and not even being able to remember the night she got pregnant. Laura's mom was 14 when sex with an adult man began. These women who so often end up being the carriers of these secrets were just children when they had to make choices based on what they knew what to do and what they knew of the world. I'm going to leave you with that. That's it. I'm going to skip my usual spiel about following socials and leaving reviews. Please come back next week. I will be back. I'm Eve Sturgis. This is Everything's Relative. Bye-bye.
Everything's Relative with Eve Sturgis is produced by Kaylin Egan and Eve Sturgis. Eve is a licensed therapist in the state of California, but conversations on this podcast are not therapy sessions. This podcast is edited by Stephanie DeLon-Zick, the logo design is by Ivy McNally, and the music is used with permission by Goodbye the Band.
Hi, Adam Peacock from My Neighbors Are Dead here. Each week on My Neighbors Are Dead, I talk to the tertiary characters real and imagined from your favorite horror films. But this summer, we're doing something different. We are taking you to the northern woods of Michigan, all the way up to Whitlow Lake, to bring you the original tale of the My Neighbors Are Dead Summer Camp Massacre. We're bringing back some fan favorites of the show as we try to piece together, through interviews with survivors, witnesses, and with any luck, the killer Chad himself, we're going to try to piece together exactly what the hell happened up there at Camp Whitlow Lake. It starts June 22nd and it runs all summer long. That's the My Neighbors Are Dead Summer Camp Massacre. You can find it on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
Campfire.